Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Joining us today is Dr. Al Kertz, and we're going to dig into the topic of ventilation, specifically continuous hutch summer ventilation for dairy calves. Welcome, Al. Great to have you with us here today.
Thank you. It's that time of the year, heat stress season, and that's why last month we discussed one study, and this month there's going to be another one. So I'm going to repeat a little bit of information up front. We talked about this zone of thermal neutrality, and that's the range of temperature between which calves don't have to expend any energy to cool themselves or to stay warmer. And for young calves under 3 weeks of age, that's about 59 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit. As they get a little bit older, the lower end of that zone goes lower because they start to eat more starter and have a heat of rumen fermentation, which is like an internal furnace. And that's why cows do so well in wintertime, but not so well in the summertime because how they shut down that furnace somewhat, they eat less, so they have less heat of fermentation. So what's good is that we need this kind of information for calves. We haven't had it. There's been more information for cows, but there's a group at the University of Florida and then some at the University of Georgia, Tifton, and now a group at the University of Wisconsin in the Madison, Arlington, Wisconsin area. They're doing studies with this heat stress. In this particular study, they used their own calves in their hutches. And if we look at the last NOM study from 2014, it said that about 70% of pre-weaned calves were individually housed. And probably most of that over 10 years ago was hutches. Maybe other kinds of arrangements as well individually. So in this case, that's why they looked at the hutches which they use at their research facility. And the study was conducted from June 12th, 2022 to September 27th, 2022. And they used 32 Holstein dairy heifers. Now they had a setup, and if you want to find that, you go to the Journal Dairy Science reference, and you'll find pictures of how they set that up with the hutches to have what they call a passive ventilation system, which is where you open the backside of the hutch and the little circular openings on the bottom, so you have as much circulation as you can have without providing any external. So that was a passive circulation system treatment. And then an active one where they had a solar cell system that actually forced some air through the hutch. And so that's the two treatments they were using. And because of that, you're limited in how many calves you could use, and then size of the herd and number of female calves and that sort of thing. But you had a total of 32. That would be 16 on each treatment. And some of the details about how they handle the calves you can find in my article, or go back to the journal article itself. But they were fed, the hutches were bedded with sand, and that's good in the summertime because if you use straw, for instance, then you would have some insulation value from the straw, and usually you don't need that during the summertime. Sand is the best thing in it, and then it drains, and if there's a need to clean up, it's easier to clean up than a straw during the summertime. Whereas in the wintertime, cold temperatures, you want deep bedded straw so they have some insulation value. So these particular calves then were assigned to these treatments at birth, and they continued on for 28 days. And then after that, they continued in the hutches. Some of them were removed in the first block in the hutches, so they had room for the second group to come in the hutches. But they were weaned in at about 56 days. But only in the first 28 days they were on this study. So now if we look at table one, here's the information on the starter. Unfortunately, it did not describe whether the starter was texturized or not. Now, if you look at the protein, uh, that's 21% on dry bases. So with 90% dry matter, that means it's about a 19%. That's reasonable. But you look at down the list at NFC, non-fiber carbohydrate. That's a calculated thing, and you see it's 52%, and most of that would be starch. So this would be a high starch starter for calves. Now, if it's texturized, that's not a problem because the particle size, the texture causes the calves to ruminate, salivate, and then when they swallow that, that buffers their rumen, keeps from becoming too acidotic. But if it's an all pelleted or a meal starter, that's really too high because it's going to be marginal acidosis and you'd have to feed some forage, usually about 5%, to keep them from becoming marginal acidotic. So now let's look at some of the data. If we look at table 2, the average daytime from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. THI is temperature, humidity index, the average was 74.2. Notice a fairly high standard deviation, 8.3, and the range was from 92 to 53. Now, for calves, the temperature humidity index heat stress is about a 68. So you can see that 68 and above would be present in the average of this data. The relative humidity was about 72%, but a range from 100 to 31%, quite a high standard deviation. Wind speed fairly low, 1.66 meters per second. Solar radiation, almost 390, but you see a tremendous range. Of course, if there's no sun, it's going to be virtually zero, whereas it went all the way up to 1277. Now, that was the daytime. Now, if we look at the nighttime, from 9 o'clock at night till 5 in the morning, remember this is Wisconsin, so you have a shorter night during the summer. The temperature humidity index average was 65. 68 and above is heat stress. So the average was actually a bit below. But look at the range, 84, almost 85. So that's clearly heat stress for the upper end of the range during the night. And the temperature, 65 Fahrenheit, but a range of 86 down to 51. The relative humidity, now notice it's 87% on average. During the daytime, it was 72%. This is typically what happens, even in tropical areas where the humidity, if anything, goes higher during the nighttime, maybe partly because the sun's not out or because it's not going through thunderstorms. So then the wind speed during the night was fairly low, but a range of up to 7 meters per second. Solar radiation, of course, is virtually none because it's not daytime. There's no sun to speak of. Now, the authors made some comments that I drew from about the solar powered fan was 1.03 meters per second greater in the wind speed in the hutches than it was when they were passive ventilation. So there is more air movement from the solar system. And then the daytime internal hutch THIA was about 7/10 of a unit lower in the solar panel. So that's not much of a difference. And temperatures taken at the same time was not really different between the hutches. So on the surface of it, it seems like the active ventilation system didn't make that much difference. Now let's look at figure 1. Now if we look in the upper left-hand corner on the respiration rate, the red bars, you see that the respiration rate was uh, not as great for the active ventilation. The red bar is not as great as negative change in respiration rate. And if we go across from A to C, the skin temperature was not as great. Sweating rate was not as great on the neck. Then we go to the second row for B. Rectal temperature was not as great. Skin temperature, not as great. Depression. And then the sweating rate measured on the rump. And the details how they did that is somewhat explained in the heading for the figure, but of course much more so in the text. So the calves had greater differences when going from outside to inside the hutches for solar powered fan hutch than for the control fan hutch rate for respiration rate and so on. So it shows that there's some apparent benefit in these measures for the less evidence of heat stress. Now let's look at table 3. Wait a minute, did I skip table 2? Nope. All right, table 3. Let's look at table 3. This is looking at the two treatments. The fan treatment would be where there was the external ventilation, and the control would be where there's passive ventilation. So body weight, not really different. If we look at the daily gain, they're virtually identical. And 1.5 to 1.6 pounds daily gain will generally double a calf's birth weight by the end of 2 months of age. So these calves are doing well. They're reaching that goal of about doubling their birth weight at the end of 2 months of age. Starter intake was a bit numerical different, 3.88. Those that were on the control actually, for some reason, ate a bit more starter. I'm not sure if that had something to do maybe with the location of starter, but it was not significant difference. It was like a 0.18 probability. If we look at after the ventilation period, remember that was only for the first 28 days. If we look at 42 days, there's about a 9-pound difference, but again, not a significant difference. In 56 days, there was greater body weight at when they were under control. So that seemed kind of strange in a way, but remember there was a lot of variation here, so there was a little significant difference. Now, if we look at the last figure, remember this was done in 2022, and we're 4 years later, and this was just recently published. They tracked these calves through various periods. So, notice at 6 months, the probability of the calves surviving, it was identical. At puberty, there was a little higher survivability for the passive ventilation, but not significant. Now, notice that after you got past the first breeding, the first service, that the numbers of those that were in a passive ventilation system, less of them survived. And when you get all the way out to mid lactation and the late lactation in the first lactation, those were significant differences. So that's in a way maybe surprising, because there didn't seem to be that big a difference in the measurements of active versus passive ventilation. But one of the things we don't really understand yet is how much does heat stress and lack of performance or difference in performance before weaning affect their later growth and lactation. There are other studies that have shown that just the daily body weight gains uh, prior to weaning, even if they're not much different, they do show up later when they have a higher rate of gain before weaning in not at 6 months. The weights are about no different, but it does show up later in lactation. And so the thinking is that there's probably something going on there, either with the maybe the genes that are turned on are not turned on when the heat stress occurs, or they don't gain as much, or there's some difference in maybe the growth hormone or metabolism that is turned on or not as much turned on prior to weaning, so that as they later go into lactation, it shows up with more milk production. So this is an area that's quite interesting, and there's more data that show that prior to weaning, if calves don't have heat stress or gain more, they do better. And so this is another study, but this one strictly looking at heat stress.
Very good. A reminder to post any questions you have for Dr. Kertz there in the chat on your screen or in your social media feed. So, Dr. Kertz, what would you say then is the bottom line in all of this?
Well, the bottom line is that this may not be practical to put in a ventilation system like they did. And of course, the other thing is it can depend a lot on the hutch. These hutches, if you look at the pictures, they have a big opening in the back and down below. So they probably get a lot of ventilation. And there was no shade for the calves in the hutches or when they were outside in the little corralled area. So shade was not a factor in these studies, but we know that shade can also be beneficial for calves. So, and then the number of calves is low because it's very intense to do these types of studies. But the end result is, since they tracked these calves all the way through the first lactation, they saw benefits that you would not have noticed because there wasn't that much difference in the first month or so. So it tells us more and more that how calves do in the first 2 months before weaning impacts their performance as cows. And whether that's due to diarrhea or respiratory problems or lower rate of gain or heat stress, it all seems to have an impact on how well they do when they become cows.
It really, you have to look at the whole picture, right? You have to look at how it impacts and even how far out it can impact
That's true.
That adult animal.
Yeah. And, it's very seldom where a calf studies track animals all the way through the growth period and in the first lactation. So there are limited data on those kinds of studies because they're very expensive to do. And somebody's got to keep all the data together. And then you hope that not too many other variations are going to come in and affect them. And the other thing is they only had 32 calves they started with. So those are not big numbers to pick up lactation differences because of variability. And that's why, the original data in 2012 from Cornell University, they had 10 years of data. And that's the first time they really showed conclusively that this effect does show up from young calves to later lactation. And then there are other studies that have smaller databases. And when you combine all those data, then you can pick up these kinds of differences as long as you've tracked them all the way through the 2 years of growth and 1 year of lactation.
And of course, Al's column is posted there in your chat if you'd like to check that out. You can also find it on feedstuffs.com and in an upcoming digital edition of Feedstuff. So, Dr. Kertz, thank you so much for joining us here today. We always appreciate your insight.
See you next month.
Very good. And likewise, we appreciate all of you tuning in. A reminder that all Feedstuffs 365 sessions are available in on-demand format. Until next time for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.